The series we know is dead. All that remains are memories. In retrospect, Star Wars was the biggest and most recognized film franchise ever, and its downfall will never be forgotten. But what actually led to Star Wars destroying itself, and was it all that it was made out to be? To answer that question, we must first go back to the 1970s. To George Lucas, the idea of a space opera had been floating around for over a decade. He had long intended to create an epic space film, but his ambitious, out-of-the-box idea saw him turned down by basically every major studio. But as the story goes, Lucas would eventually be given an opportunity to bring his vision to life in the form of Star Wars. Using a story crafting method known as the hero's journey, he created one of the strangest but most memorable films of all time, and this would be followed up by a further two. Despite being rather strange for their time, these films had a uniquely likable characteristic to them. They were abstractly futuristic, but thanks to Lucas's use of the hero's journey, they had a timeless sense of heroism, which was instinctively attractive, especially to young guys. Over the next decade, Star Wars would become a household name. It was not pretentious, it was not progressively political, and it did not seek to serve as a lecture to its audience. Most importantly, it did not question the fundamentals of Western civilization, our society, and its history. And the myths in Western civilization, which are actually adopted into the story of Star Wars subliminally. 2 decades after the original trilogy, Lucas would return with the prequels. Receiving mixed opinions from fans and critics alike, the prequels were, narrative-wise, average films, just like the original trilogy, but the unique universe, setting, and characters gave the films a special charm, also just like in the original trilogy. But the qualms people used to have with the prequels have since been forgotten by the younger generation, and that is because what came next would be so abysmally bad that any critiques of the prequels were too insignificant to even be recognized. In 2012, Disney acquired Lucasfilm, and with this transition, Kathleen Kennedy was elevated to lead the company. Almost immediately, work began on sequels to the original 6 films. In retrospect, the warnings were everywhere, but few people actually paid attention. Despite what people say, Lucas had never seriously stated that Star Wars would see further film adaptations when he was in charge. He was in possession of further proposals for films, but these were never given the green light. In fact, despite the misconceptions, evidence suggests that the last position Lucas held on sequels before selling the company was that they would not be created. This is to say, in Lucas's eyes, Star Wars would not benefit from further films, and this is ironically probably the best position to hold. Any further Star Wars films made after 2012 would have to appeal to modern liberal sensibilities. Lucas probably foresaw this, alongside the fact that there wasn't any need to expand upon the universe more.
What if someone else beside you came to you and said, I want to make episode 7? Could you see that happening?
No.
No, absolutely, positively, you're really closing the door without any wiggle room whatsoever.
Right. There is no episode 7.
Even for someone else to come up with.
Well, there's possibility there may be another offshoot movie somewhere about an offshoot character in that world.
But not episode 7.
But not about Luke Skywalker, not about that group of people and that struggle.
And this is exactly what happens with Disney's sequel trilogy. In 2015, Episode 7 of Star Wars was released. Despite being a beat-for-beat copy of the original Star Wars film, director J.J. Abrams managed to denigrate the core concepts of the franchise in just a single sitting. And this was followed up by Episode 8, which was even more fervently pushing this narrative. Now, to its credit, Episode 9, which came along a lot later, lacked a lot of this political messaging, but it had no real story. So either way, it didn't help. The sequels, broadly speaking, were repulsive. Why was that? Despite the special effects, the score, and the set design, they lacked what made Star Wars, or indeed any heroic narrative, actually work, and that is an understanding of heroism and of human beings in general. The original films played on heroic masculine attributes and presented women in a feminine light as well. This is the idealized relation between men and women, and it is in basically all classical stories. In contrast, the sequels, who despite having male directors were spiritually directed by women, basically inverted this. The men in the series, including old heroes like Luke, are presented as fumbling idiots, devoid of spirit and substance.
Let's all repeat the mantra, it's only a movie. And if you think you're going to go into the movie and recapture your childhood, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. I thought, look, why mess with the success? We're never going to catch lightning in a bottle again. We had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Let's let the memories suffice.
In contrast, the women in the film personify some of the aggressive elements falsely identified with masculinity, along with sassiness and an attitude of ignorance, while ignoring actual masculine traits like sacrifice, selflessness, love, and kindness. This is the sort of intellectual product that usually emerges from women when they are put into a situation in which they must write for a male audience. Since women are not men, most of them do not understand the temperaments that make up a masculine hero, like Han Solo or Luke Skywalker. These characters may have sometimes been arrogant or aggressive, but they were balanced off by other attributes of love and sacrifice. Ironically, these women also cannot comprehend positive feminine elements which made characters like Leia and Padme likable, and this comes from the liberal temperament that a lot of them have in their writing.
Young filmmakers, especially young women, ask me, if I want to become a filmmaker, what do I do? I'm always like, when that happens, say yes. Don't say, I don't know how to make a movie, because men don't say that. Dudes roll out of film school, throw on a Spielberg hat, and go, I know everything that I'm doing. And the reality is that you can do it. Like, you just have to have the confidence to walk in there and pretend like you know how to do it. I'm telling you guys, the truth. That's how I made my first film, was that I was like, I know what's going on. I didn't at all. And I think it shows in the movie. But I got to make my first one, which helped me to make my second one. And the second one will help me make the third one. And then I stopped because they won't let women make more than 3.
The result of all of this was hard to describe. Many people who watched the sequels walked away with this feeling. It was terrible, but they couldn't exactly summarize why. It is most likely because, as these films were overseen by liberal women, that the liberal female temperament found its way into the narrative in every way. See, most films like thrillers, action films, and so forth are directed at men. Heroic films resonate with men in a way that they simply do not with women. Part of the male temperament is brotherhood and sacrifice, and both are interlinked. This is why men find films like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars somewhat emotional, but even more so war films like Saving Private Ryan and so on. In contrast, battle scenes in films or scenes of sacrifice literally do not make emotional sense to the vast majority of women. Women have no real emotional connection or desire to sacrifice in the manner a soldier does. This is why the only times women cry in war films is when the attractive actor dies, or something really horrific happens in a literal sense. They will cry when a soldier lays down his life for, let's say, his romantic interest, which women will naturally superimpose themselves into on the story, but in an abstract sense, the broad idea of sacrifice is almost always attractive to men and men only, and lost on a lot of the female audience. It is because it is biological. Women desire to be as far away from these situations as possible to safeguard children. They are wired this way. Failing to account for this, which is what 21st century progressive liberalism does, only leads to failure. The stories suck, they are not compelling, and both because they are not realistic. Of course, even suggesting this sets off alarm bells to the modern liberal worldview, but it is true, and the fruits of this are evident in modern adaptations of franchises like Star Wars. They're not heroic, they don't seem cool, and they rarely even make sense. The most immediately dislikable elements of these sequels, which people noted before they were even released, were the characters. And this ironically ties into what was just mentioned. When most women try to write heroic characters, they are not writing from the heart, but from the head. And what they create usually misses the mark. Just look at a lot of the female characters they create. Their female characters are usually loud, sassy, and almost always dislikable.
They said, there's no women in the movies. Who do you think the heroes are in those films? What do you think Princess Leia was? She is the head of the rebellion. She's the one that's taking this young kid that doesn't know anything and trying to save the rebellion. She's the hero of the movie.
It may also come down to the fact that a lot of these women writers will infer what men find attractive based off of what they find attractive. What they look for in men must be what men look for in women, they think. A sense of strength, a battle-hardened attitude, and so on. Yet in practice, men find such female characters irritating and unnatural. This is on top of the fact that those overseeing the sequels already had a liberal bias against men and Western culture to start with. And this is what results in a sequel film like Episode 7 or Episode 8. Luke is spiritually dead, outdone by an untrained apprentice. Finn is subjugated to Rey, and the entire plot, especially in Episode 8, basically revolves around the clashing of ridiculous feminine temperaments, all trying to outsass one another. But perhaps the greatest example of this spiritual masculine death in the trilogy was Han Solo. In the old films, Solo was the pinnacle of the redeemed character. He had escaped a hedonistic life and dedicated the rest of his life and resources to help Luke, who represents the moral path, and Leia, representing perhaps the desire for stability, marriage, and a future, against objective evil which he was previously careless of. All of this is done away with in Episode 7. Here we are presented with a broken man, but read between the lines and you'll see just how subliminal the messaging is. Han Solo in many ways represents also the old sensibilities. He is white, he is a male, he's more traditional, and to the audience literally a symbol of a previous age gone by. Thus, there can be no doubt that in the film, his story is one of vengeance against the audience. We are presented with Solo in Episode 7 as a weak, broken man. It is inferred that Leia was the better of the two, a competent girl boss fleet commander whose competence just put Solo to shame. Solo was portrayed as being caught in the past. Despite his best efforts to make something good of himself, he couldn't escape. It's also inferred that him and Leia, despite their best efforts, could never have worked out. Now consider the subliminal messaging the director may have been pushing here. Solo, the old white guy, represents the old ways. Despite his best efforts, he was bound to fail to produce something of value. In contrast, the progressive Leia leading her troops was destined to succeed, although nothing beyond their gender appears to indicate why this would have been the case. But it gets worse. Their son, Kylo Ren, is shown to be an erratic and emotionally damaged person, stemming partially from his relationship with his father. In a confrontation with Kylo Ren, it is inferred that Solo regrets not being good enough to raise his son. Kylo then stabs him, killing him, which Solo does not resist, in a dramatic insinuation that this was the necessary punishment for his vices. In an ironic twist, in Episode 9, we see that Kylo Ren is actually redeemed from this curse. How so? By submitting himself to Rey, who, if anything, represents the progressive opposite of what Han Solo represented in the original films. So, if Solo represented both the audience and the classical ideas that made Star Wars work in the past, then the insinuation from the writers and directors was that the old methods were doomed, and that the only solution is for them to quite literally be killed. After the financial success of the sequels, Disney then turned its eyes to streaming platforms. We had already seen The Mandalorian, a profoundly average show which did little to improve upon the Star Wars universe, but then we got Kenobi. There is no easy way to even start to analyze this series. It was extremely hyped up, hopes were high, and what was delivered failed in most metrics. The show attempts to present the inter-trilogy story of Kenobi. Fans did predict that this would be a return to form for Star Wars. Given the context, it was expected that the show would focus on world building, with a focus also on connecting the dots through the exploration of the lore. Instead of any of that, the delivered product focused almost entirely on strange political messaging, rather than exploring the connection between Anakin and Kenobi after many years, although the directors did sort of try. The entire show tangentially instead focuses on Reva, the new antagonist. To say the story was predictable was an understatement. It stuck exactly to the liberal playbook. From her first appearance, it was clear that Reva, the antagonist, would not be sent off as the villain by the end of the show. Instead, it was easy to predict that she, given her typecasting, would find redemption, and that her decisions to become evil in the first place would somehow be justified as understandable. This is exactly what happened. Reva may be the worst antagonist in Star Wars history, and this is saying a lot given what we've got recently. But what hurt the most was the disservice done to Obi-Wan Kenobi, the character. He was never smeared in the sequels. He remained the only Star Wars signature character who had not been demeaned. But of course, the humiliation ritual wouldn't be complete without also pulling Obi-Wan down from grace. In the series, he is presented rather predictably as someone who has lost his edge, someone from a different age who cannot keep up. While the show does try to portray him as retaining a bit of willpower, which he taps into at some points, broadly throughout the series he is nothing more than another fumbling male character. Somewhat incompetent, somewhat clueless at times, and sometimes outdone by a child. What more even needs to be said at this point? But the thing is, none of this could compare to what came next.
I want to ask you both, because this is, I would say, arguably the gayest Star Wars, I think, by a considerable margin. And are you excited about that? Are you bracing yourself?
Not the gayest Star Wars. Not the...
It's pretty gay, let's be honest. Leslie, how do you feel?
Am I gay? Yes.
Well, no, I know you are gay, but I'm asking, are you excited about putting this, this is going to be a talking point.
Is it going to be a talking point?
I'm sure some...
Because nerds are gay.
Well, some nerds are very not gay and are very threatened by gay
Well, that's
stuff.
true. But in my world, nerds are gay.
Okay.
The Acolyte could best be described as the culmination of Disney's Star Wars. It is the end product that all the writers and directors of the sequels and spin-offs had desired. It is a soulless, lifeless, thoughtless attempt at liberal political messaging, with nothing more than the title of Star Wars to cover for it. To be fair, by this point, basically no one was getting fooled anymore. Before the show was even formally announced, people were already ridiculing it for what would inevitably be a humiliation aimed at fans. But to call this Star Wars would be a disservice in every conceivable way. Basically nothing remains of what once was. Even the fundamental ideas behind the series have been somehow corrupted and altered. The idea of good and evil is at the heart of the Acolyte, but in a perverted way. Star Wars was always clear-cut on good and evil, yet the Acolyte did away with this in favor of some sort of pluralism. Instead, the audience is compelled to sympathize with what is essentially a cult which stands against the Order of the Jedi. The exact reasons given are weak, and it is essentially an appeal to moral subjectivism.
I mean, the best parts about Star Wars is there is no good or evil. It depends on what side you're standing on, truly. You know what I mean?
Even the idea of the Force no longer feels pure. In the past, the Force was essentially a representation of faith, and it could be used for good or evil. The Acolyte warps this, turning the Force into a strange, esoteric power which has no clear boundaries of good or evil. Ironically, the Jedi in the series, who try and stop the perversion of the Force, are posited as actually being in the wrong, and that the Witch Coven's strange use of the Force as an esoteric tool is actually perfectly fine, if not justified, as the Jedi were supposedly controlling its use unfairly. So to call the show terrible would be an understatement. It is basically just political messaging. It has no connection to Star Wars in any conceivable sense.
This is like what we understand to be Star Wars, like the idea that like that only came from George Lucas, that only George Lucas holds the key for what we understand to be Star Wars is just untrue. And I think the prequels are an excellent example of that.
After considering all of this, it is worth noting that all three trilogies were released during times of political and social turbulence, each with their own degeneracies. The originals were released immediately following the counterculture and the start of the women's liberation movement. The prequels were released after the revival of feminism in the 1990s, and the sequels were released during the rise of modern, woke liberalism. From outward appearances, it is true that these sequels, spin-offs, and modern shows were made to appeal to modern liberal sensibilities. They ticked all the DEI boxes, and they seemed to be at the forefront of progressive entertainment. It is true that the directors and writers did actually have liberal worldviews, and it is true that the progressive doctrine, when applied to heroic stories, always fails to produce something good. But what if it was deeper than that? It was doomed from the start. But what if that was the plan? What if destroying Star Wars was the intention from the beginning? There can be no doubt that Star Wars represents more than an assortment of films. It is a cultural landmark. Before 2015, when people spoke of Star Wars, most people had mutual feelings of nostalgia and joy. There are many cultural landmarks which act as points of mutuality and community in society. These are especially important when societies become less religious and more secular, because while everything begins to fragment, at least these landmarks remain. The goal of the social revolution in the West was to destroy the existing culture, destroying all remnants of what once was. This is literally the proposal of Herbert Marcuse, the most prominent of the so-called critical theorists. Critical theory, a revolutionary school of thought based off of Marxism, is important to mention here. It emerged about 100 years ago, but from the 1940s through till the 60s, it grew rapidly and transformed, thanks to two of its adherents, Herbert Marcuse and Theodor Adorno. The 1960s counterculture was literally a byproduct of Marcuse and Adorno's school of thought, which emphasized a hatred for the existing society and a desire for its overturning. Critical theory directly led to what is called intersectionality, a movement started by students of Marcuse, which itself led to the feminist revival in the 1990s and again in the 2010s, as well as the so-called woke movement. So it is not an empty statement to say that, yes, one of the goals of the modern Star Wars films was to destroy the legacy it once had, and turn it into a repulsive entity. This is part of the liberal worldview, whether people realize it or not. It is written into the doctrine. But perhaps this point can best be summarized in the words of the critical theorists themselves. As Willy Munzenberg, a critical theorist and Marxist revolutionary, put it in the 1930s, "We must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink. Only then, after they have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose the dictatorship of the proletariat." Today, fans still say that if Disney loses enough money, they will realize the error of their ways, and the series will get back on its feet. But this is naive thinking. Those behind Star Wars today, from the directors to the producers, not only dislike the old films, they hate Star Wars as a concept altogether. They hate what it represents. The words of those involved cannot be more clear. They hate the vision Lucas had. They hate the way the script uses conventional masculine and feminine traits to build characters. And they hate that the narrative is fundamentally Western and heroic in nature. Star Wars, as Lucas envisioned it, was an assortment of stories based around the Western, distinctly Christian narrative of good versus evil, with the young man having to bear the burdens of his world, overcome his own iniquities, and rise to the occasion to put an end to chaos. This narrative, which Lucas based off of the hero's journey, represents a timeless form of human truth, intertwined with the natural struggle people face and the journey which specifically faces young men. The goal of the original Star Wars films, whether Lucas consciously knew it or not, was to serve as inspiration. In contrast, the modern films have no such spark. They are neither inspiring or meaningful in any way. In fact, if anything, they are designed to degrade and demoralize those who watch it. So here we are today. After the release of The Acolyte, it is fair to say that Star Wars is officially dead. There is nothing of substance left. It has been a slow process, documented in the films, of slowly and deliberately chipping away at all recognizable elements of the franchise, until we're left with a diversified, liberalized, soulless husk. People today still see Disney and Lucasfilm as some sort of blundering, incompetent giant. Others view Disney as a company hemorrhaging money, soon to be corrected for their mistakes through financial incentives. They still believe that this corporate franchise we call Star Wars can come back to life through the directives of Disney, if only they are corrected. But the truth is, the fall of Star Wars seems to have been planned from the beginning. It was a planned demolition. It was an act of war during a time of cultural revolution and change. There is no way around this, and Disney receives financial kickbacks from the likes of BlackRock if they lose revenue producing films which have liberalized narratives which stick to the SDG guidelines. In other words, they never lose, only you, the viewer, does. This is because they are at war with you. Ironically, there is a lesson to be learnt here, a lesson which is to be found in the original Star Wars films. It is the story of how an insidious force slowly encroaches upon the lives of normal, good-hearted people, and begins to destroy what they love. Just like the hero's journey, the character is confronted with evil, and is given two choices: the path of ease and menial happiness, living ignorant of the deterioration around him, or the path of difficulty in which he must realize what is happening, and rise to the occasion despite the hardships, to put an end to the evil which is encroaching around him. The world is getting darker, and the rot caused by evil is becoming increasingly apparent, and all it does is destroy and denigrate. Star Wars in its original form was not mere entertainment, it was a hero story, and stories are made to serve as lessons. And now is the time to put these lessons into action.